here just so we've got some important announcements to make, and then we'll get into our lesson. So we're now recording. So welcome. It's Friday, so I'm kind of glad to see the weekend. It's been a very busy week. I know it's been very short, but anyway, you're all here, so I'm thankful for that. Before we get going, I do want to introduce our tutor for our class. His name is Zaire. Zaire, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Well, I hear you loud and clear, so if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
All right. Well, hello, good afternoon. My name is Zaire Goins, and I am a junior and a double major in psychology and political science. Can you still hear me? Just making sure. Okay. I'll be your tutor for this semester. My times have already been posted. They're Wednesdays, 3 to 4 p.m. We are also offering individual tutoring. So if you need help outside those hours, you can email me, zgoins@live.esu.edu, or you can email tutoring, the tutoring department, tutoring@esu.edu. This Saturday, I will send out a link for my personal ID for Zoom. I know that this semester can be tough at times. I understand that completely. The professors, tutoring department, and myself are here to help with your needs, more so pertaining to the academic side. My tutoring philosophy is pretty simple. The goal is for you to come in with a question and leave with an answer. I strongly believe that it's best to be proactive and not reactive. If you need extra help or just want to prepare for anything upcoming, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you, and I hope you all have a good semester.
All right, thank you, Zaire. A quick question for you. Are you pretty well versed with, this is your second semester working with me, right? I think we met last semester. It's spring,
yes,
right?
last semester. Yeah.
Okay. How are you with the APA format?
I'm pretty good with APA format. Yeah, I know how to work with that.
Okay. I know for a lot of the students here, they had questions about APA, and Zaire or anybody really in the tutoring center, they're going to be pretty well versed in that area. So use that as a resource. They're there to help. I can't overstate that enough, because yeah, many of you are going to be psychology majors, and you're going to be reintroduced to APA format, and it's not very difficult once you get the hang of it. And that's kind of what I do here, is just get you introduced to that format. But yeah, again, Zaire is here to help. He's a great resource. I've heard great things coming out of last semester about his services and how he helped people. So yeah, definitely use him as a resource. Okay. All right, thank you so much, Zaire.
No problem.
All right, so just a couple other service announcements before we get going here today. So first of all, I apologize about Wednesday. I was hoping to meet with all of you and do a presentation. Unfortunately, my technology had other plans, so that didn't work. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen again. But you know, it is what it is, and we are where we are. In regards to Packback, I think most everybody, as far as I know, it looks like everybody in this class is on Packback, which is great. If you are having any difficulties, please contact Bree. She will help you out with getting you set up. Yeah, I mean, but the questions seem to be going very well this week. I'm impressed with what I'm seeing. Many of you have some really great questions. One thing I do want to note, or actually two things I want to note on Packback is, number one, make sure, do your best to have your question pertaining to this week, okay, or whatever week's topic we're dealing with, because that kind of generates thoughts about what we're talking about in our lectures, what you're reading in your notes, what you're reading in the books, the videos that you're watching. It just really solidifies what we're doing in that area. So please try and keep them pertinent to that. And you know, I'm not very much of a stickler. I think we talked about it on Wednesday. Some of you had asked, do we have to stick with exactly what's in that week? No, I'm very liberal with what that looks like. So for example, if you wanted to tie in our senses or perceptions to this week's topic, for example, that would be okay because we're going to be covering it and it really all ties together anyway. The other thing I want to mention about Packback is to make sure that you're filling out for your questions. You're filling out 3 parts. You're asking the question, you're describing where you're getting your question, and you're citing your source. Okay, so very important to get full 6 points for that. And then, of course, your other four points will come from your 2 questions that you're going to answer. Okay. Bree is not with us today, I believe. I think she emailed me and said that she had something else going on, so she will not be joining us today. So if you have a question that comes up while we're talking, I'll take some time to stop and answer some of your questions in the chat. So go ahead and just put them in there. Monday, I will be available for a short time to answer questions. I will not be having a lecture. So nor will I be recording it. So if you have anything that you need to talk to me about, you can join me on Monday. I'll be available to about 1:30. I have another commitment, unfortunately, that I have to attend to. So anyway, no lectures on Monday. We'll resume. We'll pick up on chapter 3 on first thing Wednesday. Okay. All right. Any questions before we begin? I'll cover. I'll allot some time at the end here to talk about the assignment and anything else. But anything before we get moving?
I do have a question, but it's not related to psych, if that makes sense. Just
If
because
it,
I'm
go
trying
ahead.
to put on my D2L and it's not loading.
Your D2L is not loading?
Yeah, mine isn't either.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like down at the moment because I even tried to go on my phone on D2L and it's not loading. It keeps saying like something's wrong.
Let me see what's happening. Yeah.
I think the
Okay,
website
fine.
is the same thing is happening to me.
What's that?
I said I think the website is down because the same thing was happening to me.
Okay, mine just updated. Okay, so maybe try and refresh. It did take a little bit extra
That's what
time
I
there.
kept doing, but then I was like, okay, maybe I should give it a few minutes, but I can try one more time. I mean, luckily for me, I already had something with Psych open, so I was even able to get on the Zoom call. I thought I wasn't
Okay.
able to, but
Yeah. It looks like it's working.
oh, now it's working.
Okay.
I guess it
Yeah.
was down for a couple minutes or something. That was so weird. Okay.
Okay, I promise I didn't kick anybody out. All right.
Yeah, no, I wasn't assuming that. I was just like, okay, maybe the website's down right now or something. But all right.
Okay. All right. Well, glad it's working now. So we're rolling. So this week, as you read, and I know we're coming up on the end of the week, so I'm not really hopefully introducing anything new to you. We're looking at the biological perspectives of psychology. So what does that mean? Remember when we talked about in week 1, we talked about how we really look at psychology in 2 different spheres. We look at it in the physical sphere, which is the brain, and then we look at it at the process sphere, which would be the mind, right? So we start off talking about the brain. We talk about the physical structure because that's really the highway. That's the hardware that gets everything going and makes us who we are, helps us learn, helps us remember, and really provides us with a lot of survival, lot of survival ability, right? So with that in mind, we look at the biological psychology as the branch of neuroscience. Okay, so neuropsychology might be something that you hear about, and that's dealing with neurons, actually the highway, if you will, that the messages go through your body. And I think we talked about neurons being the building blocks, right, of our brains and really our nervous system. And we're born with a lot of these building blocks, and they start forming into these neural pathways. And these neural pathways carry messages all throughout our body and within our brain, okay? So just be aware of that. I mean, neurons are really the building block, and that's what keeps things going at a very microscopic and basic level, all right? So let me share with you my screen so I can illustrate how neurons work. All right. So some of these images, any of you that follow along with the slides, they're also located on the slide. So here is a neuron. Now, keep in mind, you have thousands of these going from your fingertip to your brain, okay? One strand could interconnect your pain receptors and carry that signal all the way to your brain, okay? So what you have here is the soma. This is the neuron cell. This is the body of everything that tells all the other parts what they're supposed to be doing. All right. So if you can imagine, if you had a pin and you put it into your finger, it's activating pressure sensors. It's activating brake sensors. There are all sorts of senses, receptors in your finger. And the harder you push and the more that you activate, it sends signals to your brain. And you, through life's experience, know what those signals are. So for example, any combination of brake receptors and pain and pressure receptors are going to tell your brain that tissue is probably being damaged. And that's why you know that a pin hurts. And if you kind of liken it to when you grew up and maybe touched something hot, what did you do? What do you do when you touch something really hot?
You cry?
You react, right? You withdraw your hand because it hurts. It's telling your brain, and that's something that's hardwired into all of us. Those pain receptors tell us that something's going on and we need to protect ourselves. So if you can imagine touching your finger with a pin, and that receptor activates your neuron, your nucleus, and tells it, hey, something's happening. And that's not what I wanted to do. And we'll say right here is what's attached to that pain receptor. So that carries a signal, and maybe this one carries a signal, and this one carries a signal. Now your soma says, hey, we have activation here. We've got something going on. We don't know what it is. So the soma is going to release a signal through the axon, okay? So this axon is nothing more than just kind of a wire. And if you think of in terms of electricity or computers, we have interconnecting wires, right? And those wires carry an electrical charge throughout it. Exact same thing that a soma does. You have your source of energy, which is your soma, and then you have your axon, which is your wire, right? Now, if you notice on, oh, that's not good. I didn't mean to do that. If you notice around this axon, this is called a myelin sheath. So this is like a fatty substance, and this really happens a lot throughout through most of your axons. It protects it, it insulates it, and it keeps it from touching other axons and misfiring. Okay, so it's really, if you think of a wire, again, it has that protective coating on it, right? That insulation. Because what happens if you cross your wires? You short something out, right? And we can actually see that throughout our body. We have, we sometimes have things that short out. And you may, I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but maybe somewhere on your body, like for me, it's my little toe. If I like put some pressure on my little toe, I can feel like, it's kind of weird, but like behind my ear, I kind of feel a little bit of pressure behind there. All right. And maybe you have a different, like some people I think describe belly buttons or knees. Anybody have examples of where they touch on their body and they kind of tingle somewhere else?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you care to share or just, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Point taken. So anyway, some of us have that experience, and that just means that somewhere within your body, those neurons are connected, and yeah, and when it gets to your brain tells you something different. All right. So anyway, as the electron moves down the axon, it goes to another dendrite, which connects to another neuron, okay? Now again, if you can imagine, we have thousands of these throughout our body. So this is more, what I'm showing here is more of a representation of what a neuron looks like, all right? kind of not very attractive, are they? But this is more of a diagram of how this works. All right. So again, you have any number of these activated, and based on that activation, that soma tells the neuron to fire. So what happens, and I know your book describes a lot of like what happens with positive and negative of potassium and sodium. I'm not going to go too much into that. I think your book, it doesn't really go in the weeds on it either, which is okay. I actually have a demonstration that I do with live classes, but not much we can, it involves candy. But unfortunately, I can't pass out candy here today. But just know at a very rudimentary level that these positives and negatives swap to make a good conductor for the the neuronic pulse to move down here freely, okay? And once it's pushed down here, it goes out to these synaptic branches or synaptic knobs, all right? Which then connects to another one of these, all right? So what happens with this electronic pulse, all right? What's really important to remember is that there's no level of intensity. There's no higher charge. It's just all or nothing. It's one charge. And I know some people kind of have a hard time wrapping their mind around that because they think, well, if I push harder on that pin on my finger, then I'm going to feel it more. That's not an intensity of a signal going through. What's happening is you're having more of those pain receptors activated. And the more that are activated, the more that they go through to your brain and say, we have something major happening here and it's getting worse. More pain receptors are being activated here, all right? So that's how that works. So as I explained, within the soma, it has a threshold, all right? You're all seeing this, right? It's not, you see an action potential on the screen? Okay, good. So your soma has this threshold, this predetermined threshold. So as I said, maybe you have a couple of dendrites being activated, but not many. So if it doesn't get to that level, nothing happens. There's no firing, no pulse is fired at all. But once it reaches that potential, that threshold, it fires. And all of these positive and negative charges rearrange to make sure that this neuron fires accurately and properly. And then after it fires, it takes a little bit to reset, to go back to hyperpolarization or back to its resting potential, ready to fire again, okay? All right. Now, at the synaptic knob, for some reason this is showing right here in the middle. That's actually not the case. You have a series of neurotransmitters. So once that pulse reaches the end, the synaptic knob, these tiny little vesicles, they're called vesicles, containing neurotransmitters, which are chemicals. We have hundreds of these throughout our body. Now, we're only going to focus on about 8 of them for purposes of psychology. But you have all these neurotransmitters that are released because they're being told to, that this is what the electronic charge does. And once they get to the edge of the synaptic knob, it goes into what's called a synapse. A synapse is a gap, as you can see right here. There's really nothing there except for a little bit of fatty tissue there to keep that separated. And the reason why that has to happen that way is because these receptors have to be able to accept whatever neurotransmitters that come across here, okay? Now, this is where we experience problems in psychology or neurology, is when something goes wrong. Usually something goes wrong in here. And what that looks like, if we introduce any kind of chemicals, like nicotine, for example, We'll use this example as dopamine. I'll explain what dopamine here is here in just a minute. But if you have nicotine that goes across here, say that these receptors are accepting dopamine, nicotine acts as a dopamine, which fills in this gap once it's introduced into your body and replicates. Even though you don't have dopamine receptors firing off, it replicates dopamine, making you feel happy. Okay. So what tends to happen with nicotine is that these, and again, this is just an example, these vesicles get used to not firing. They kind of go dormant. They don't need to, because you have nicotine coming across these, the synaptic gap, and acting like a happy chemical, which is what dopamine is. It's our reward center. So why is that a problem? Why is that a problem if we get used to dopamine not firing here? If dopamine's our happy chemical and we have nicotine replacing that, and dopamine no longer fires or fires very little, why would that be a problem in terms of psychology?
You're going to have to rely on the nicotine to be happy.
Right. And you don't have to identify yourself, but many of you that are either smokers or vapors or caffeine has a very similar effect. What happens if you don't have your coffee 2 mornings in a row?
You start withdrawing?
Yeah, you go through actual withdrawal because these aren't being stimulated. And that causes a problem, right? What does withdrawal look like from caffeine and nicotine?
So it's basically just like agitation, headaches, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, okay, headaches, that's something a little bit different. That's because of your blood being thinned. But absolutely, you might feel a little extra pressure that day. You might be a little more irritable. Right? Yeah, you might get a little bit more worked up because you're not being rewarded. Your reward center has been impacted by that. Okay, so that's essentially what happens with these synapses, and that's why it's important. And when we get into pharmacology, psychopharmacology, at the end, this will kind of explain what's happening there. Now, as I said, we're only going to be looking at a handful of neurotransmitters. All right, and these are the big ones. These are the big ones that we're probably going to be talking about, especially with serotonin and dopamine, acetylcholine or ACH, endorphins, norepinephrine, and GABA. Now, serotonin you may have heard of before. Serotonin helps to regulate our moods. It keeps our moods stable. And again, when you look at going back to the synapse here, having serotonin flowing freely keeps us level, keeps us thinking, keeps us focused. And when we're lacking serotonin, we may start lacking energy, right? We may feel blue. We may not want to eat enough or eat so much, or we may eat too much, right? So a lot of things happen when serotonin is not properly activated. Dopamine, we talked about, is our pleasure chemical. That's what we feel when we feel good. Well, many of you are maybe runners, or you get involved in sports or something. Dopamine is activated during workouts. Okay, and that's your pleasure sensor. That makes you feel good and makes you feel alive and vibrant. Acetylcholine is very important with muscle contractions. All right. When we feel stress, acetylcholine actually reduces. So we don't feel pain nearly as much. And maybe, and this kind of ties in with endorphins. Endorphins also are involved in our ability to experience pain. So these two, when we're dealing with pain, acetylcholine and endorphins are implicated in our ability to reduce our sensation to pain or increase it. All right. GABA, we'll talk a little bit more when we get into conscience, state of awareness and consciousness. And glutamate, we'll talk a little bit more when we get into memory. All right, so these are basically your neurotransmitters that we're going to be talking about throughout this course. All right, here's just another illustration. Now this talks about, your book talks about reuptake, and this is going to be important when we get into pharmacology as well, because this is another area where we need to be aware of what happens across these synapses. If, for example, we'll call this our serotonin. This uses the example of cocaine, but cocaine is it's a blocker for our dopamine. So what happens when cocaine, the substance cocaine, gets into our body and goes across these synapses, our dopamine is hyperactivated, right? So not only is the dopamine going through, but the cocaine is as well. So you're getting like a super high from this. What happens, and this kind of goes into what we were talking about with dependency, chemical dependency and withdrawal, is these dopamine neurotransmitters are really not allowed to re-enter the synaptic gap, okay? They don't go back into the receptor. So that's a problem, because now we have to wait for more of these vesicles to produce instead of reusing them. So it kind of destroys them. The enzymes destroy the dopamine, making it hard for us to have access to them for future occurrences, okay? All right. So let's discuss the nervous system, because we're going to be dealing a lot with this, especially when we're going to talk a lot about ANS, or the autonomic nervous system. So the nervous system is broken into two areas. Our central nervous system, which is your spinal cord and your brain. These are the pathways that connects the rest of your body, okay? So we talked about all those neurons. You have these neuron fibers, these superhighways going down your spine and branching out into your extremities, your arms and your legs and everywhere else on your body and your organs. Your peripheral nervous system, however, this is what really controls the rest of your body through those neurotransmitters that we were talking about, right? So primarily your ANS, your autonomic nervous system, controls your parasympathetic and your sympathetic division. Now pay attention to this, because this is going to come up throughout our course in regards to fear, our fear response, right? So who can tell me what happens when you experience a bear in the woods, for example? What does your body do?
It basically triggers like a fight or flight response. So either you're gonna start running or you're just gonna stand there in fear, like shock.
Right. So fight or flight, exactly. So what happens during fight or flight? What physiological symptoms do you experience during fight or flight?
So you might feel like more like anxiety or stress, like your body like tenses up, and like, you might feel like you're like almost like shaking because you don't know what to do, because you're thinking about fighting and standing there and facing it, or just running away.
Okay, so muscle tension, right? Okay. What's the purpose of muscle tension? You mentioned that. I'm sorry. So what does muscle tension do for us? Think back to survival. It gets us prepared to run or fight, correct? What else happens in our body? What about heart rate? What happens to heart rate when we experience fear?
Your heart races.
Heart rate increases, right? What else? What else happens?
Adrenaline starts pumping.
What's that?
Like your adrenaline starts going, depending on the situation.
Okay. Absolutely. Adrenaline, your endorphins, right? Adrenaline. Endorphins, sorry. Your endorphins kick in. Now, the purpose of your endorphins are to activate your muscles, reduce your pain, your experience for pain. Now, why is that important during fear, whether we're fighting or fleeing? Why are endorphins? Why do you think our necessity to experience pain in those moments is diminished. What's the biological explanation for that? What you say?
I can so I can give like an example. So, one of my NCOs, for example, when they were in like a firefight over in Afghanistan, his adrenaline got going, and then he didn't realize, but he got shot until after the firefight. And I guess it has something to do with whatever's going on at the moment. It's your body is so concerned with what's going on at the moment, it doesn't really pay attention to the fear or anything else. It's more focused on whatever, trigger the endorphins to kick in.
Absolutely. And that is instrumental in our ability to survive, right? Because if you think about it, if we get wounded and we stop and cradle that wound when we're in the middle of a fear response and trying to get away from danger, that's not going to promote us surviving, is it? We're probably going to, whatever that threat is probably going to get us. So endorphins are important in diminishing pain so that we can push through that and get to safety. What about awareness, like alertness? What happens to alertness during fear?
It's basically raised or heightened in a sense.
Okay, so alert. Is this coming through, by the way? I just wrote alert and I'm not seeing it on my
I
screen.
don't see alert.
You don't see alert?
No.
Okay, I don't know what happened here.
The endorphins, and that's the last one.
Okay, I'm not sure. Maybe it stopped sharing. Let me get back into that. So, love technology, all right. Okay, there we go. So alertness goes up. What about your pupils? What happens to your pupils?
They dilate.
Right, pupils dilate. Why? Why would your pupils dilate? Why do you think that's important in survival? So you can see, how about, go ahead.
Attention to detail.
Right, so you can see, right? You can see a little bit more vividly. It helps you discern whether or not your threat is, threat is imminent. How about breathing? What happens to breathing?
Hyperventilation.
Okay, hyperventilation. So would you say it increases or decreases?
Decreases.
Decreases, absolutely. Most people get that wrong. I know I'm writing over other things here. Most people think, I'm not going to say most people, many people think that breathing increases. And it's because of what you said earlier, I didn't catch your name, that you're hyperventilating. You're hyperventilating because your body and your mind is lacking oxygen, and you're hyperventilating to try and get an increase in that. It's actually a safety mechanism. So all this is important to understand, because when we get to stress management and therapies, we're going to be looking at, didn't mean to do that. Erasing when I don't want to erase. We're going to be looking at breathing. We're going to be looking at muscle tension. And ultimately, let's see, with those two, because all these other things we don't really have control over, right? Because our sympathetic nervous system, why it's doing that. Our sympathetic nervous system is activating. So most of these things just happen automatically, but we have control over our breathing and muscle tension if we put our minds to that. And with that, it tells our minds that maybe we're not in as much danger as we think we are. Do any of you practice in any kind of meditation or yoga or breathing exercises?
Yes.
So you probably can attest. You can really relate to how breathing and purposely relaxing your muscles tells the rest of your body to slow down. Things are okay. And that's the reason behind those types of therapies, to target breathing and muscle tension. All right. So conversely, so here's some examples of what happens with, and we talked about many of these, what happens during fight or flight, right? Pupils dilate, decreased salivation. your lungs dilate. Digestive functioning, okay? So if somebody's in a fight or flight mode, their sympathetic nervous system kicks in, their digestion, they may not have a big appetite, right? Because you're not thinking, your blood is not really going to the organs for relaxation. They're going because they're going to the ones that need that are vital for survival. So your lungs, your heart, your muscles, that's where your energy goes. Any Star Trek fans out here? Probably nobody wants to admit. Anyway, if you were, I always liken it to, if you think about the Enterprise traveling, and once in a while you'll hear somebody say, like the engineer say, divert all energy to life support or something like that. That's kind of what your sympathetic nervous system is doing. It's telling the important parts. It's rerouting your energy, because we only have a certain amount of energy within our body. It's rerouting energy and blood and oxygen to the areas that need it the most for survival. And then when you're out of trouble, your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and it tells your body, oh, I think it stopped moving again. Sorry. Tells your body to start functioning normally. Sorry about that. All right. All right, so any questions on the sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system? Now we're going to be talking about the ANS, the parasympathetic nervous system, frequently throughout this course, because we do delve into learning, and learning comes from fear, as well as meeting biological needs. So pay attention to how we draw these parallels throughout this course with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. All right. All right, so just really quickly, I'm not going to go too much into areas of the brain because it's pretty well covered in your book. So just quickly, I do want to highlight the purpose of some of these lobes in your cerebral cortex, which is the outer layer of your brain. If you look at the brain, we kind of look at it from the inside out. So the lower brain is what we call our animal brain, which contains the hippocampus, the amygdala, the pons. All of these systems are vital for functioning, for very basic level animalistic survival. Okay, and we all have many species throughout the planet have that small brain, that animal brain. What's unique about humans is we have the cerebral cortex. I wish I should have put a better image for the brain on here. But we have the cerebral cortex, which is our outer brain. And this contains more advanced functioning, such as our occipital lobe, our parietal lobe, our temporal lobe, and our frontal lobe. So these lobes are unique to humans, well, primates, even primates such as monkeys and apes have parietal, temporal, and occipital, and to some degree, frontal lobe. This is very unique to humans, our frontal lobe. This is where all of our decisions are made. This is where we engage in judgment and reasoning and morals. This all happens in the frontal lobe. And interestingly enough, with the frontal lobe, by the end of childhood, our parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes are pretty well formed. It's our frontal lobe that continues to evolve and continues to grow well into our early 20s for many of us. So why is that important to know? I'll tell you. The reason why that's important is because when we look at pharmacology, when we look at medicines, and we look at medical advancements, and we look at substance use, we all, I'm not taking one side or the other here, but this is a valid argument for people under 21 drinking alcohol or smoking, for that matter, because we do know that those chemicals affect our brain. They affect our ability for neurons to form. With our frontal lobes still developing, why do you think that's important that we monitor people under 21, or yeah, young adulthood abusing substances, because it could affect reasoning, right? It could affect morals, it could affect judgment. So that's one of the areas that we look at as to, why the age of 21. And it's really because of substance abuse, not necessarily substance use, but substance abuse. And and some schools of thought, they think if making it legal to drink under 21, that would lead to more cases of abuse, right? So that's just one of the schools of thoughts on that. All right. Any questions so far on the material I covered? Any comments? All right. Did that make sense? I know I kind of covered a lot of this stuff. I just wanted to show how the neurons do work. And one thing that I also want to have you keep in mind is neurons, when you learn something, and I'll say this again probably throughout, you can't unlearn something that you've learned, because those neurons form a pathway. And when that pathway is formed, it's permanent. And the more you use that pathway, the more the stronger that signal becomes, and really the more ingrained it is with you. So if you see something or experience something, that pathway is formed, and that does not go away. It can be rerouted or repurposed over a long period of time, but you can't unlearn something that you've learned. And that's where that phrase comes from. All right. All right. Well, so if there are no questions on the material, any questions on course related stuff at all?
Yeah, I actually have one. So for the assignment, I submitted it a few days ago, and I'm not able to go on and respond to anybody else's assignments. I don't know if that's because I submitted it wrong, or if we don't have to respond to.
Did it come in late?
No, it was for this week's.
Oh, for week 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, week 2, you don't have to respond. That was just for week 1. I did that for week 1 just so everybody could see how to submit, what it looks like. So yeah, that beyond this, I think maybe week 3 or 4, I can't remember which one of the assignments. We have one more assignment where you'll have to review, but it's due, I think, on Saturday, and then respond by Sunday or something like that. But yeah, just pay attention to your due dates, and it'll tell you what you need to do.
And we have chapter 2 and 3 quizzes due this week.
Say again?
We have chapter 2 and 3 quizzes due this week.
You should just have chapter 2 due this week. Did it show chapter 3 being
It says
due?
chapter 3 for the 13th.
Let me look. Oh, you know what let's see here. All right, so I'm showing chapter 3 is due on the 20th. So let me look at course schedule. Again, pay attention to your syllabus and pay attention in course content, because for some reason, the course schedule, and I've put in a trouble ticket with this, for some reason, the course schedule is showing wrong dates. And I can't fix it. I mean, the dates that I'm showing are correct. Actually, it's showing. Oh, I see. Next 7 days, Sunday the 13th. Yeah, that is weird. And if you look on it, it says, if you're looking at course schedule, it does say quiz 3 due on September 13th, but right below it, it says due September 20th. So go by the date that's listed on the actual assignment. Yeah, just for some reason I can't, there's just no way for me to fix that, so I apologize.
Yeah, I was just making sure, because I saw on the syllabus that it was due on the 20th. I just wanted to double check.
Okay, yeah. Chapter 3 is due next week. All right, any other questions?
So we don't have to comment on anything in D2L, just on Packback?
Correct, yep.
And I do have another question. When I bought the access code from the bookstore for Revel, I didn't get the access code. I only have, I logged in, but I didn't get the access code. So I just did the thing for like 14 days.
Okay, so you bought the access code and you didn't get an access code?
Yeah, I bought it from the bookstore. Like I bought all my, the stuff that I needed.
Yeah, contact the
from the
bookstore.
bookstore.
I don't have I have no control over the access codes whatsoever. So get in contact with the bookstore if you bought something and you didn't get it from them.
Okay.
I have a quick
I have a question.
Go ahead. Elena, you want to go ahead?
Oh, I didn't mean to like cut her off if she was like wanted to go.
I couldn't see who else had chimed in.
Oh, okay. I just had a quick question about the assignment number 2. We're just submitting that in the Dropbox, right? We don't have to like comment on any other essays or anything.
Yeah, that's Nick asked that same question. Yeah, you don't have to comment on anybody else's. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Did somebody else have a question?
And our quizzes only do this, and the quiz is due Sunday, right? And chapter 3 is due next week,
Yep.
right? Right. No problem.
Yep, quiz is due Sunday. One thing to note: just make sure that you're getting your diagnostics in for your group projects. So don't forget about those. That's going to determine what groups you get put into. So be thorough and honest.
Where's the diagnostics?
What's that? It's
Where
under it's under week 2 assessments under content.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I got put in this class, so I didn't get the Packback account. So how do I make one?
Get with. Have you talked with Bree yet?
Yes.
Okay, she should be able to help you. I gave her the information to get people set up with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. If there are no other questions, I hope all of you have a fantastic weekend. I'll stick around for just a few minutes here if anybody needs to speak with me one-on-one. But other than that, have a good weekend. And again, don't forget, I won't be here. I'll be here on Monday, but I just won't be doing any kind of presentation. So it'll just be one-on-ones if you need it, okay? Have a good weekend, everyone.
You too.
You're posting it straight to D12 after you end the meeting?
Not right after. It's going to take a little bit for me to get it, but I'll get it eventually.